The winds swept across the desolate prairie, lashing against Caroline Morgan's thin, frayed coat as she knelt in the frozen ground to bury her husband, Elijah. There was no pastor, no gravestone, no solemn farewell, only her bare hands, raw and red from the cold, and an old wedding blanket wrapped around his body. Elijah had once promised her a new life in the West, a place where their children would no longer be judged by the past. But the fever came swiftly and without mercy, stealing him away from his family in a land with no one to hear their grief. Behind her, Emily clutched her little brother Samuel, their cheeks flushed from the biting wind, their eyes filled with confusion. "Where will we go now, Mom?" The question cut into Caroline's heart like a blade. She rose, brushing the frozen dirt from her skirt, forcing herself to lie so her children could keep moving forward. "We'll be all right. It's the manger." They had only a fragile shelter, pieced together from the wreckage of the wagon and a torn canvas sheet. Food was nearly gone. The fire was fading, and nightfall brought fears lurking in every direction. Yet through the pain and the despair, Caroline understood one truth: she could not afford to break. There was no one left to protect her children, except herself. On the first night, after burying Elijah, Caroline couldn't sleep. Every crack of wood, every unfamiliar sound beyond the darkness made her heart pound. She gripped her husband's old hunting knife tightly and stepped out of the makeshift shelter when she heard footsteps that were neither wind nor wild animals. At the edge where firelight met shadow, a tall figure stood motionless, no weapon raised, no threat spoken. The stranger bent down, placed something on the snow, then stepped back, vanishing into the forest before Caroline could move closer. She waited a long time before daring to approach. At her feet lay a small bundle, dried meat, herbs tied with twine, and a leather water flask. Not a trap, not a warning, a gift. She carried the food inside. Samuel smiled for the first time in days. Emily ate slowly, but the despair had faded from her eyes. Caroline did not sleep. She sat by the fire, watching the darkness, as if it might answer the question burning in her mind. Who helped them? At dawn, she found faint footprints circling the camp. They never came too close, never crossed the line, only watching, standing guard. They were being followed not to be hunted, but to be protected. In the nights that followed, the mysterious figure kept returning, never revealing a face, never speaking a word. Yet each time, something essential was left behind: a cleaned rabbit, a handful of dry pine cones for fire, thick strips of hide that could be stitched into worn shoes. Footprints appeared around the camp every morning, close enough to show watchfulness, far enough to respect distance. Caroline's fear slowly softened into cautious gratitude. She no longer raised her knife toward the forest when night fell. Though she still stayed awake by the fire, her eyes fixed on the dark line of trees. Whoever it was never took anything, never demanded, never imposed, only gave. One evening, Caroline chose to answer. She placed half of her remaining biscuit and a hand-sewn button taken from Elijah's old coat on the snow. It was not much, but it was everything she could offer. By morning, the gift was gone. In its place, resting atop a new bundle of supplies, lay a single black raven feather, still, deliberate, like a reply without words. Caroline smiled for the first time in weeks. In this unforgiving land, an invisible bond was being tied, not with promises, but with trust quietly taking root. One morning, Caroline woke to an unnatural silence pressing down on the prairie. No birdsong, no familiar bundle waiting on the snow, no footprints circling the camp, only a single chouge mark, deep and heavy, pressed into the frozen ground. It was not the careful step of her unseen guardian, but the sign of someone who did not fear being heard. Her heart tightened. She followed the track when a dry branch snapped behind her. She turned, and there he was, the man from the forest, but this time, the calm in his eyes was gone. "Go back," he said, his voice low and rough like smoke. "Someone else is here." Just two short sentences, yet they drained the warmth from Caroline's blood. She had never heard him speak before. The mystery of his silence was now replaced by something far worse, a warning. He offered no explanation, but in those dark eyes was real fear, something she had never seen in him before. Then he vanished among the trees, leaving her standing in the snow with a heavy sense of dread. Caroline ran back to the camp and pulled her children close. If the man who had silently protected them was afraid, then this danger was no small thing. And this time, she understood. She could no longer wait to be saved. She had to be ready to fight. The danger came faster than Caroline expected. Two men appeared at the edge of the camp, their coats torn and filthy, their eyes heavy with greed and contempt. One carried a rifle slung over his shoulder. The other dragged a dead rabbit through the snow, the gesture a silent threat. Their crude laughter shattered the fragile quiet. Caroline pushed her children behind the torn canvas, pressing them into silence. Elijah's old rifle held only one bullet, one chance. As the men moved closer, she stepped forward, her hands trembling but her gaze unyielding. "Stay back," she said, forcing her voice not to break. They laughed. One of them charged. The gunshot cracked through the air. The single bullet tore into his thigh, dropping him into the snow as blood spread across the white ground. The second man lunged at her. Caroline hadn't had time to reload before he grabbed her coat. Then the forest erupted. A figure burst from the trees, fast as a hunting animal. Steel flashed for a heartbeat. A short scream cut off. It was him, the man from the shadows. No longer a silent watcher, he fought with cold precision, finishing both attackers without hesitation. Caroline stood shaking, gasping for breath amid snow and blood. For the first time, she understood clearly. That man had not merely been watching them. He had chosen to protect them. After the blood-soaked confrontation, Caroline finally learned the mysterious man's name, Toa. When she asked why he had helped them, he didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted past her, through the falling snow, as if slipping back into an old and painful memory. "Because someone should have helped my family," he said quietly. Toa told her he had once had an older brother. They were branded thieves, hunted, treated like wild animals simply for existing on their own land. His brother had been shot while trying to find food for their family. No one stepped in. No one came back to look for them. Caroline fell silent. She understood what it meant to be abandoned in the wilderness, pushed to the margins by greed and prejudice. His loss mirrored her own. "What did you see in me?" she asked. "Fire," Toa replied. "The way you stood up to protect your children." The words were not poetic, but they carried weight, heavy as stone. He hadn't helped her out of pity. He had helped because he recognized in her the same will to survive that his family once had. From that moment on, the bond between them was no longer just gratitude. It became understanding shared between two people who had been hunted and who refused to fall. After the danger finally eased, Toa decided it was time to move Caroline and the children away from the fragile, makeshift camp. He led them deep into the forest, to a narrow rock cleft hidden behind tangled roots and dense pines, a place secluded enough to swallow sound and conceal the glow of fire. Inside, the stone shelter was dry and warmer. No longer a temporary hiding place, but somewhere meant for living. Toa built a fire with practiced hands, showing Emily how to stack the wood so it would burn longer and steadier. He set rabbit snares, taught Caroline how to stitch with sinew, and how to brew pine needle tea to keep the cold at bay. Samuel stayed close to him not out of fear, but trust. Toa was not gentle with words, yet his patience revealed itself in every slow, deliberate movement. "Where did you learn all this?" Caroline asked. "From my mother," he replied, "and from losing her. That is never ways and brands to time of the joys." Caroline understood then that he wasn't just helping them survive. He was giving them knowledge, something that could not be easily taken away. Deep in the forest, she was no longer just a mother struggling to endure each day. Under Toa's guidance, she began to become someone who could protect her family herself. No more waiting for miracles. No more waiting to be saved. The thawing snow had not yet carried peace with it when the past returned. Caroline felt at first the familiar stillness of the forest, the kind that warned of danger drawing near. Toa stood beside her, his gaze cold and focused, as if he had expected this moment all along. Then they appeared. 5 riders crested the hillside, horses pushing through the mud. At their head rode Benjamin Harold, the man who had once forced her family off their land. His face was carved from stone, his eyes filled with contempt and quiet hatred. "I didn't expect you to still be alive," he called out, his voice thick with scorn. Caroline tightened her grip on the rifle. He was the reason Elijah had lost everything, the man who had driven them into flight across the prairie, and now he had returned to finish what he started. Benjamin was not alone. The men riding with him carried guns, knives, and the confidence of those accustomed to taking what they wanted. Hooves struck wet ground. Metal clinked against metal. The air stretched tight, like a drawn wire. "They think you're alone," Toa said softly. Caroline glanced toward where her children were hidden inside. She was no longer the woman trembling beside a frozen grave years ago. This time she did not run. The true confrontation had begun. Gunfire tore through the clearing as Benjamin Harold gave the order to attack. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, splintering wood into the air. Caroline crouched low behind the structure, firing back with precision and knocking one man clean off his horse. Inside, Emily clutched Samuel while Caroline positioned herself at the doorway, the last barrier between them and the violence outside. Toa vanished into the forest like a shadow. He struck from behind, fast and merciless, an arrow, a blade. Each scream was brief before being swallowed by the wind. Panic spread through the attackers. Benjamin charged straight for the cabin, his eyes burning red. "It ends here," he roared. Caroline pulled the trigger, but the rifle jammed. A frozen heartbeat. Toa lunged in, slamming Benjamin to the ground. They grappled in mud and melting snow fists, boots, flashing steel. Benjamin broke free, kicking Toa back. Caroline didn't hesitate. She grabbed the fallen gun. One shot thundered. Benjamin staggered, staring down at the blood spreading across his chest. Then he collapsed face first into the mud, never to rise again. Silence fell. Only ragged breathing remained, and the pounding of Caroline's heart in her ears. Toa stood beside her, wounded, but unbroken. This time, the past was no longer chasing them. This time, they had ended it. Spring returned to the prairie, carrying away the heavy snow that had once buried Caroline's pain. Wildflowers pushed through soil that had been stained with blood. Birds came back, filling the air with the sound of new beginnings. The homestead was rebuilt with stronger timber, straight fences, turned earth, chickens scratched in the yard. Emily and Samuel chased butterflies through the tall grass, their laughter replacing the gunshots of years past. Caroline stood on the porch, no longer the woman who had collapsed beside a frozen grave. She had fought, she had lost, she had pulled the trigger when she had to, and now she chose to live, not merely to survive. Toa stayed, no longer a figure in the shadows of the forest, but standing beside her in the sunlight. Two people once hunted, now building a true home together. Caroline was no longer alone. She was strong, she was whole, and for the first time, she belonged. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. What do you believe creates true strength in a person, mere survival, or the choice to love after everything has been lost?